So my name's Zoe, I work here at Have and When. I'm currently in recovery for 7 years. I'm an ex-patient of Have and When as well. I came in here as an 18-year-old in 1997, and I was a serial relapser. I was someone, I was always on that revolving door. I was in and out of the detox centre up until 2008, which was my last admission. 2 or 3 times a year I was here. I took anything that put me to sleep or numbed me from life. That was my aim in life, was to numb, whether it was heroin, whether it was crack cocaine, whether it was prescription medication, whether it was antidepressants, whether it was alcohol, whether it was cannabis, whether the off-licence was my dealer, whether the doctor was my dealer, or whether I went to the man on the street corner. Poly drug user, took anything, try anything once. I've been clean for 7 years. I live a totally abstinent way of life now. That works for me. I'm a big believer in individual recovery. That works for me. I started using substances when I was about 13, 14. That party lifestyle, that kind of hanging around with the cool kids, so I thought at the time. Wanting to be like the older kids, numbing my way through life, if you like. I learned very early on that substances checked me out of life. I didn't need to think, I didn't need to feel, I didn't need to have any of these emotions, I didn't need to take responsibility, and I certainly didn't need to look at myself. I could just float my way through, The progression I had at the beginning, it was all about alcohol, sniffing links through a sock. I tried the aerosol route, I tried the alcohol route. That was never enough, because nothing's ever enough. I'm always looking for that next fix. I started using cannabis, which went to LSD. I was selling drugs at 14. I started taking the club, ecstasy, amphetamine. It went to cocaine. And then I found heroin. Heroin fitted me like a glove. It did what none of the others did. It completely wiped me, completely numbed me, I believe stigma affects our ability, one, to be honest about our circumstances, how bad they have got, and also our family circumstances as well. I was a mother. Stigma stopped me from, being able to be open and honest regarding how I was as a mother. How I was, I learned to be very dishonest because of stigma. So I could never reach out and ask for help and give a true account of my circumstances and what was happening in my life at that time because of stigma. What would people think? People don't like drug addicts. I can't tell social services that I'm a drug addict. All this kind of, and even when they knew, it was like, oh, but I'm not that bad, I'm not doing that. It was kind of like, what it did is it put its hand over my mouth. And I didn't have that ability to be honest, one, with myself, and 2, with others. Exactly how bad my addiction had got. I always felt I had to kind of fluff it up a bit. Oh yeah, I've got heroin in my system, but I just used last Wednesday. I just smoked a little bit, when really I was injecting all over my body every single day, as well as, multiple other drugs. But because of that stigma, I could never get the help, I could never be honest, I could never be open to receive the help that I needed. Absolutely. I struggled for years. I struggled for years because of the stigma of how the world viewed me. I was just a lost, lonely, scared little girl who wanted to be liked and loved and accepted in a world where I didn't feel I belonged. So then to admit that, and that was without the drug problem. Yeah, that was why I took substances. So then all of a sudden you add a drug problem onto that. It's kind of like the stigma affects my family, because I don't want to be honest in case people think, look at my mum and say that she's a bad mum. I don't want to admit about it in case of my kids, in case they get. Stigma doesn't just affect me, it's the ripple effect, isn't it? It's the ripple effect that comes from me and my drug use, but the ripple effect that, the consequences of my family and friends, and stigma stops me asking for help, but also it stops them. It's not just, it's that ripple effect that family feel it as well. Kids feel the stigma. They don't want to ask for help with how they feel having an addict as a mum. So stigma isn't necessarily just about the person who's using substances. It's about family members as well. So it puts a hand over everybody's mouth, doesn't it? You know, it's not just about that addict. We've got to think that families that are affected, families, friends, communities, that's where I believe stigma affects, you know, who stigma affects. I believe that everybody should have the right to ask for help, should have the ability to ask for help, feel free to make that decision, to ask for help, to ask for change. I believe, especially coming out of lockdown, I believe that stigma affects the person who's on £300,000 a year the same way it affects somebody who is on universal credit. The stigma is the same. They don't want to reach out and ask for help. I believe that tackling stigma would give that person who's earning £300,000 the ability to admit that they've got a problem, because they don't want to, because they're rich, and it's not a problem because they've got money. And you know, it affects people different, doesn't it? And I always say addiction doesn't discriminate, but thankfully neither does recovery. So when you start tackling stigma, you start tackling people's inability to reach out and ask for help. You give families permission, you give kids permission, you give mothers permission. You know, family stigma is massive when you look at generational trauma, because people haven't wanted to be honest. It's that stiff upper lip. What happens indoors stays indoors. When you feel free to say, actually no, this is me, this is the problem I've got, this is what I need help with, and not feel like you're going to be judged, that's a beautiful thing, and there needs to be more of that. I believe it's important to celebrate recovery, not for me and my own gratification, but for the freedom that gives you. Standing in your own power, I freely share my story, you know, because the way I look at it, that I am me now, you know, my addiction does not define me as a person. Who I am today defines me, my actions, how I treat people, how I go out of my way, my family, my friends, you know, people I come into contact with on the unit. I freely share my story, you know. Right. So I believe it's important to celebrate. When I'm doing morning meetings with the patients and they'll say to me, it's a week today, and I'll start clapping and you can see it in their eyes, wow, I'm celebrating it. The reason I believe in celebrating it is that people persecuted me for years. Judges, police officers, family, social workers, you know. A lot of people I come into contact, kind of, the consequences, I was given consequences when I was in addiction. In recovery, I believe in freedom, yeah? And me celebrating isn't just about me celebrating my recovery, it's being a visible role model for people in addiction. It's shining that light and saying, look, this is me today. You can do it. There is a way out. That you don't need to feel that stigma, because we do recover. I believe that own kind of like the punitive way of treating an addict, that, you know, that contingency that families put on addicts. I will love you if you stop, yeah? You can be a member of this family when you stop. So they make their love contingent on the change in that person. And I think that when we start looking at stigma and how it affects addicts and families and communities even, you know, when we start looking at actually saying, you don't need to be ashamed to ask for help. When we see the people who are homeless on the streets, we can look at them visibly, the presentation, and say they are struggling. Stigma is also about tackling the people who wouldn't come forward because of their jobs, because of their families. They could be well-to-do. And that's why I say that addiction doesn't discriminate, because stigma affects people the same way. And it's making it okay for that person who's earning a good living. You know, I know judges, I know solicitors, you know, famous people who have come out and broke free of that stigma and opened their mouth and had a voice and been visual recovery. How many people look at them and say, wow? People come to me all the time, whether it be through social media or they'll see me on the street and they'll say, I've been following your journey and I've got clean. And I had a girl, not yesterday, the day before, message me, Zoe, I'm 30 days. You were the first person I wanted to tell after my children, because she's watched my journey for 7 years. That gave her hope, and that broke the stigma that she felt. and she's 30 days clean. The ripple effect is the same in recovery. It's giving people a voice. I just think it's really important. The more people, the more the message is put out there, the more it gives, you know, I'm free, I open my mouth and I'll tell people, because I believe in giving that other person permission and a voice to tell people about theirs. Because there could be people out there who don't want to break that silence, but they look at, you know, they look at the stigma campaign and, well, actually that person and that person and that person and that person. So it's that ripple effect that, you know what, it's okay to ask for help. It's okay, you can do it, you know. We're not all perfect, are we? Thankfully, yeah. We're all human beings, you know, and addicts are human beings, you know, and they're not defined by their addiction, they're defined by what they do today. And I think that's really important to share, that there's hope. You can break the cycle and you can find a new way to live.